The stars had always been cold, but Ambassador Kira Vasquez had never felt their chill until that night when the transmission arrived and everything changed forever. She stood in her office on Station Harmony, the great diplomatic hub where 200 species gathered to discuss trade and peace and the endless business of running a galaxy together. The walls around her displayed holographic art from a dozen worlds, gifts from alien delegates who smiled at humans but never quite trusted them. Galactic Concord had welcomed humanity 50 years ago, but that welcome came with conditions and whispers and careful watching. Humans were Deathworlders after all, born on a planet that most species considered a nightmare of crushing gravity and extreme weather and predators with too many teeth. Kira remembered her first day on Station Harmony when a delegate from the Mallory Collective had stared at her with his 4 eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. He had asked her how humans could survive on a world where the very air tried to poison them with oxygen and the ground shook without warning and fire fell from the sky during storms. She had laughed and told him that Earth was home and that humans loved their deadly little world. The Mallory had not laughed back now. Kira sat at her desk and watched the emergency light blink red on her console, and her hands trembled as she opened the encrypted file that had arrived from the frontier. The message was short and broken and filled with static, but the words cut through her like a knife made of ice. This is New Elysium Colony, calling any human vessel. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. They came from nowhere, and they are taking our people. Please send help. Please someone help us. They are breaking through the transmission ended there in a burst of white noise, and Silence. Kira played it again and again, listening to the voice of Dr. Sarah Chun, who ran the research station, a woman she had met once at a conference who had smiled and talked about the ancient alien ruins her team was studying. Sarah had been excited about history and discovery, and the secrets buried in dead civilizations. Now Sarah was screaming for help. That would not come. Kira moved fast through the corridors of Station Harmony until she reached the chamber of the High Council, where the leaders of the Concord gathered to make decisions that shaped the fate of worlds. She burst through the doors without waiting for permission, and every alien face turned to look at her with expressions of surprise and annoyance. Ambassador Vasquez, said High Counselor, the Rex of the Ven Dominion, his tall gray body shifting with displeasure. You interrupt sacred proceedings with your presence. What matter could possibly justify such disrespect? New Elysium has been attacked, Kira said, and her voice rang through the chamber like a bell. 12,000 humans on a research colony in the frontier sector. We received a distress signal before all communication was cut. I am requesting immediate Concord military assistance. The chamber fell silent for a moment before the whispers began, and Kira watched as the delegates exchanged glances that spoke of calculations and politics, and concerns that had nothing to do with 12,000 innocent lives. Counselor Therix raised one long hand for silence, and spoke in his calm, measured way that made Kira want to scream. The frontier sector borders Virith Dominion space. We have no treaties with the Virith, and no authority to send military vessels into that region. Such action could be seen as provocation. Provocation. Kira repeated the word like it was poison on her tongue. Someone just attacked our colony and took our people, and you are worried about provocation? The Concord must consider all factors, said another delegate, a small furry creature from a world Kira could not remember the name of. We cannot risk a wider conflict over one colony. Perhaps the humans there strayed too close to Virith territory. Perhaps they brought this upon themselves. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest as she looked around the chamber at all these beings who had smiled at her and shaken her hand and called humanity their friends and partners. None of them would lift a finger to help, The Virith are slavers, she said quietly. Everyone knows this. They take people from unprotected worlds and sell them across the outer territories. If they have our people, then every hour we waste means more suffering. We sympathize with your concern. Counselor Therix said in a tone that held no sympathy at all, but the Concord cannot act. You may file a formal protest, and we will discuss the matter at our next session. That is all we can offer. Kira stood there for a long moment, looking at the faces of creatures who had evolved on gentle worlds where the weather was mild and predators were few and survival was easy. They did not understand what it meant to fight for your life. They did not understand what humans were capable of when someone threatened their own. I understand, she said finally, and something in her voice made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked out of the chamber, with her back straight and her jaw tight, and her mind already racing through possibilities that the Concord could never imagine. She walked to a private communication room and sealed the door behind her and entered a code that she had memorized years ago but never thought. She would use. The screen flickered to life and showed the face of Fleet Admiral Marcus Chun, a man with gray hair and hard eyes who sat in a room that officially did not exist on a base that no treaty acknowledged. He looked at Kira and waited. They hit New Elysium. Kira said, The Virith took our people, and the Concord will not help. 12,000 souls, Marcus including women and children. The Admiral's face did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something ancient and terrible that humans had carried with them since the first days when they hunted mammoths and painted caves and learned that the universe was cruel to the weak. Are you certain about this, Kira? He asked. Because once we start down this path, there is no going back. I am certain, she said. They took our people, and they expect us to do nothing, because that is what civilized species do. They have no idea what we really are. Admiral Chun nodded slowly and reached for something off-screen. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as the void between stars. Protocol Prometheus is now active. May God have mercy on anyone who stands between us and our people. The transmission ended, and Kira stood alone in the dark room, with stars wheeling past the window. Somewhere out there her people were suffering, and crying for help that the galaxy refused to send, but the galaxy had forgotten something important about the quiet friendly. Humans who smiled and signed treaties and played nice with their neighbors. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had not just survived, they had conquered that world, and they had never stopped being what evolution made them. They were the children of a death world, and someone had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. Someone had given them a reason to remember what they truly were. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, where no satellite could see and no treaty inspector could reach, Fleet Admiral Marcus Chun walked through corridors carved from ancient rock and lined with technology that the Galactic Concord believed humans were too primitive to possess. The walls hummed with power from fusion reactors that had been running in secret for 30 years, and the air tasted of recycled oxygen and anticipation and the sweat of soldiers who had waited their entire lives for this moment. Marcus had been a young officer when humanity first made contact with the Concord, and he remembered the celebrations and the hope and the belief that joining a community of peaceful species would mean safety and prosperity for all of Earth. He also remembered the private meetings with generals and scientists who looked at the galaxy with older and wiser eyes. They will smile at us and welcome us, Admiral Yuki Tanaka had said in that first secret meeting. But they will never trust us because we are what they fear most. We are survivors of a world that should have killed us 1,000 times over. And somewhere deep in their minds, they know that makes us dangerous. The old guard had made a decision that night. A decision that no politician knew about and no treaty covered. Humanity would play nice, and follow the rules and pretend to be harmless. But they would also prepare for the day when smiles and treaties would not be enough. Protocol Prometheus was born in shadows and built with patience. Over decades of careful work, Marcus stepped into the main command center and saw his senior officers already assembled around a holographic display that showed the true extent of human military power. The image made him feel pride and sorrow in equal measure, because it represented both their greatest achievement and their deepest fear. 3,000 warships waited in hidden bases across the solar system and beyond. They hid in hollowed asteroids and beneath the ice of frozen moons, and inside space stations that the Concorde believed were mining operations. Every ship was crewed by volunteers who had trained in secret and lived double lives and never spoke of their real purpose. The Prometheus Protocol is now active, Marcus said to his officers, and his voice carried the weight of history. New Elysium colony has been attacked by the Virith Dominion. 12,000 of our people have been taken. The Galactic Concorde has refused to help. Commander Lisa Park stepped forward with fire in her eyes. She was young and fierce and had spent 10 years preparing for a war she hoped would never come. What are our orders, Admiral? We go and get our people back, Marcus said simply, and we show the galaxy what happens when you touch humanity. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as officers rushed to their stations and began sending encrypted signals to hidden bases across known space. Within hours, the greatest secret in human history would be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same. Marcus watched the preparations and remembered his grandfather who had fought in wars on Earth when humans still killed each other over lines on a map. The old man had taught him that peace was precious, but that some enemies only understood strength. They think we are soft. His grandfather had said, because we learned to talk and trade and make friends. But talking does not mean we forgot how to fight. It just means we choose when to bare our teeth. The Virith had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs across the solar system. Hidden bases came alive with activity as crews who had waited years for this moment rushed to their ships. On Mars, a door opened in the side of a mountain and revealed a hangar holding 50 heavy cruisers. In the asteroid belt, a mining station transformed as its outer shell fell away and exposed the battleship hidden within. On Titan, a frozen lake cracked and shattered as carriers rose from beneath the ice. The ships were beautiful and terrible, designed not by committee or compromise, but by humans who understood war in their bones. They were fast and heavily armored and packed with weapons that the Concorde had forbidden humanity from developing. Every ship carried a name from human history, names that reminded the crews of what their species had survived. There was the Thermopylae and the Stalingrad and the Midway. There was the Dunkirk and the Iwo Jima and the Rorke's Drift. Each name was a promise that humans had faced impossible odds before and refused to break. Marcus boarded his flagship, the Earth's Fury, and took his place on the command deck, surrounded by officers who looked at him with trust and determination. The main screen showed the fleet assembling, thousands of ships emerging from hiding places across the system and forming into battle groups. Open a channel to all ships, Marcus ordered. And when the communication officer nodded, he spoke to the men and women who would follow him into fire. This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chun speaking to all personnel of the Prometheus fleet. 50 years ago, we joined the Galactic Concorde, and we promised to be peaceful, and we kept that promise. We smiled and we traded, and we made ourselves small so that others would not fear us. He paused and looked at the faces on his bridge. Humans whose ancestors had crawled out of caves and crossed oceans and reached for the stars. But we also made a promise to ourselves. We promised that if anyone ever threatened our people, we would answer that threat with everything we have. Today, the Virith Dominion broke the peace by attacking New Elysium Colony. Today they took 12,000 of our brothers and sisters and children. Today they made themselves our enemy. His voice hardened into something cold and ancient. The galaxy thinks they know what we are. They call us Deathworlders, and they mean it as a warning. But they do not understand what that word truly means. It means we have been fighting since the first human picked up a rock and refused to die. It means we have faced extinction 100 times and clawed our way back every single time. It means we do not know how to quit, and we do not know how to lose. The fleet hung in space around him. 3,000 ships crewed by soldiers who had trained for this day and never stopped believing it would come. The Virith think they can take our people, and we will do nothing. They think we are tame because we chose peace. Today we teach them the truth. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you wake the sleeping giant. Today we bring our people home. He raised his hand, and every ship in the fleet powered their jump drives simultaneously. The energy readings spiked so high that every sensor in Concord space detected them. And on Station Harmony, the alien delegates stared at their screens in disbelief as 3,000 human warships appeared where nothing had been before. Jump, Marcus commanded. The fleet vanished in a flash of light, and the galaxy would never be the same on. Station Harmony Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood at her window and watched the distant flash of the jump drives. She thought about all the times alien delegates had patted humanity on the head and told them to be patient and to trust the system. System had failed, and humanity was done. Waiting, her communicator buzzed with frantic messages from Concord officials demanding explanations and threatening consequences. But Kira just smiled and turned off the device. The time for talking was over. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Deathworlders were going to war, and anyone who stood between them and their people would learn why the galaxy should have been more careful about what they awakened. War Commander Vrexus of the Virith Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship and laughed when his sensors detected the incoming human fleet. He was a veteran of 100 slave raids, and he had never lost a battle against the soft species of the galaxy. Humans, he said to his officers, with contempt dripping from every word. They send their little ships to challenge the Dominion. How amusing. How foolish. His second-in-command, Tilax, brought up tactical data on the main screen and studied the approaching vessels with more caution than his commander. War Commander, there are 3,000 ships in the human fleet, and their energy signatures are unlike anything in our records. Perhaps we should call for reinforcements. Vrexus waved a clawed hand dismissively. He had heard stories about humans, of course, tales of a species from a death world who had somehow achieved space travel despite coming from a planet that seemed designed to kill everything on it. But stories were just stories, and the Virith had been conquering worlds for 10,000 years. They are mammals from a rock, Vrexus said. They breathe poison and drink acid and think that makes them strong. But they are new to the stars, and we are ancient. Ready the fleet for battle and prepare the slave pens for new merchandise. The Virith fleet moved into formation with 500 warships, bristling with weapons that had burned 100 civilizations into submission. Vrexus felt confident and eager for the easy victory that would add more slaves to his collection. Then the humans arrived, and everything Vrexus believed about war changed forever. The human ships dropped out of jump space at a distance that made Vrexus blink in confusion. Standard combat doctrine across the galaxy called for engagement at long range where shields could absorb damage, and tactics could develop over hours of careful maneuvering. The humans appeared almost on top of the Virith fleet, close enough that Vrexus could see individual hull markings on their vessels. What are they doing? Tilax asked, with fear creeping into his voice. The answer came in fire and thunder as the human fleet opened up with everything they had at point-blank range. The first volley tore through Virith shields like they were made of paper and 36 ships died in the opening seconds of the Battle of Rexus. Screamed orders, but his fleet was already in chaos. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. They did not maintain safe distances or exchange fire in orderly patterns. They charged directly into the Virith formation and started, killing at close range where their weapons hit harder and their aggression gave them every advantage. A human cruiser rammed a Virith destroyer at full speed, sacrificing itself to take out an enemy twice its size. Vrexus watched in horror as the human crew kept firing their weapons even as their ship crumpled around them. "They are insane," he whispered, but it was not insanity. It was something far more terrifying. It was the way humans had always fought when protecting their own. It was total commitment and absolute refusal to stop until the enemy was broken boarding pods launched from human carriers and slammed into Virith ships with enough force to punch through armored hulls. Vrexus received frantic reports from his vessels as human marines empowered, armor stormed through corridors, and fought with a ferocity that made veteran Virith soldiers flee in terror. The reports were all the same. The humans would not stop. You could shoot them, and they kept coming. You could wound them, and they kept fighting. They moved through smoke and fire like demons from ancient nightmares, and they showed no mercy to anyone who stood in their way on the destroyer Virith's pride. Commander Yalis tried to rally his troops against the human boarding party, but his soldiers were breaking. A human marine had taken 3 shots to the chest and was still advancing. Her armor cracked and her blood floating in the zero gravity, but her rifle still firing. "What are you?" Yalis screamed as she grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The human removed her helmet, and Yalis saw a face covered in blood and sweat and something terrible in her eyes. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had finally caught her prey. "We are what happens when your planet tries to kill you for 4 billion years and you win," she said. "We are the children of Earth, and you made the mistake of taking our people." She threw him against the wall and moved on, hunting the rest of his crew through the burning corridors of his own ship. The battle lasted 6 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 30 minutes. The Virith had numbers and experience, but the humans had something they had never encountered before. The humans had rage and purpose, and the absolute certainty that they would die before they stopped fighting. The guns finally fell silent. The Virith fleet was shattered. 200 ships destroyed and another 100 captured. The rest fled into deep space, carrying stories of monsters who fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of Earth's fury and surveyed the wreckage floating around his fleet. They had lost ships and soldiers, and the cost of victory weighed heavy on his heart. But they had won, and now the real mission could begin. "Scan for human life signs," he ordered. "Find our people." The search teams found the survivors of New Elysium in slave pens aboard the captured Virith vessels. 12,000 humans crammed into cages meant for cattle, hungry and afraid, but alive. When the Marines opened the doors, and the prisoners saw human faces looking back at them, the crying started and did not stop for hours. Admiral Chun personally visited the rescued colonists and knelt beside Dr. Sarah Chun, who had sent the distress signal that started everything. She was thin and bruised, and there were shadows in her eyes that would never fully fade. But she was alive. "You came," she whispered. "We sent that signal and we prayed, and you came." "We will always come," Marcus said. "That is what it means to be human. We do not leave our people behind." But as the rescue operations continued, the search teams found something else in the Virith ships. They found other prisoners, millions of them, members of species from across the galaxy who had been taken in raids spanning centuries. They huddled in darkness and looked at the human soldiers with confusion and desperate hope. A young Marine named Jackson stood before Admiral Chun with a report that changed everything. "Sir, we have found alien prisoners on every ship. There are millions of them. Some have been slaves for generations. They are asking if we came to free them too. Marcus looked at the data and felt the weight of a decision that would shape the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. They had come for their own people, and they had succeeded. But now they faced a choice that went beyond revenge or rescue. How many Virith ships escaped? He asked. At least 300, sir. They are running back to Dominion space. Marcus nodded slowly and looked at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there was an empire built on slavery and suffering. An empire that had preyed on the weak for 10,000 years, because no one was strong enough or brave enough to stop them. We did not come this far to free only our own, he said finally. Plot a course deeper into Virith space. We are not done here. The fleet turned toward the heart of the Dominion and the war that had begun as a rescue. Mission became something far larger. The Deathworlders were no longer just saving their people. They were coming for everyone, and the Virith Empire began to learn the true meaning of fear. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, and every species with access to communications watched in shock as reports came in from the frontier. The humans had gone to war, and nothing would ever be the same on Station Harmony. The delegates of the Galactic Concord gathered in emergency session with fear and confusion painting their alien faces. The holographic displays showed footage captured by long-range sensors. Footage of human warships tearing through the Virith fleet like predators through prey high counselor. Derek stood at the center of the chamber and tried to maintain order, but his voice shook with something between anger and terror. This is an outrage. The humans have violated every treaty and every principle of civilized behavior. They have launched an unprovoked attack against a sovereign power. Ambassador Kira Vasquez stepped forward, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Unprovoked. The Virith attacked our colony and took 12,000 of our people. We asked for help, and you refused. What did you expect us to do? We expected you to act like a civilized species. Derek snapped. We expected you to file protests and negotiate and wait for proper channels. Instead, you revealed a hidden military force that you built in violation of your treaty obligations. You lied to us for decades. Kira laughed, and the sound held no humor. Yes, we lied. We smiled and signed your treaties and told you what you wanted to hear. And the whole time we prepared for the day when your civilized principles would fail us. That day came, and we were ready. The chamber erupted in angry voices and accusations. But not everyone was shouting against humanity. In the back rows, delegates from smaller species whispered to each other with something that looked almost like hope. The Mallory delegate who had once asked Kira about surviving on Earth raised his hand for attention, and the chamber slowly fell quiet. He was old for his species, and his 4 eyes held the weight of memories that spanned centuries. I wish to speak, he said. Not against the humans, but in their defense. Their ex looked outraged, but protocol demanded that every delegate be heard. You may speak. The Mallory walked slowly to the center of the chamber and looked around at his fellow delegates with sadness in his ancient eyes. The Virith have raided my people for 300 years. They take our young ones and sell them across the outer territories. We have begged this council for help, and you have always said the same thing. You have said that intervention would be too risky, and that we must be patient. He turned to look at the footage of the human fleet, still playing on the displays. Now the humans have done in days what we dreamed of for centuries. They have struck back against the slavers, and they are winning. Tell me, Counselor Therix, who is truly civilized. The species that talks about peace while innocents suffer, or the species that fights to protect them. The chamber fell silent, and Kira saw expressions changing on faces around the room. Not everyone was afraid of what humanity had done. Some were grateful across the galaxy. The same debate played out on 1,000 worlds as species watched the war unfold and asked themselves difficult questions. The Virith had been a plague on the outer territories for millennia, but no one had ever been strong enough or brave enough to challenge them. Now the Deathworlders were proving that the slavers could be beaten in the depths of Virith Space Admiral. Chun pushed his fleet deeper into enemy territory, with each victory bringing them closer to the heart of the Dominion. World after world fell as the human armada swept through. Virith defenses like a storm that could not be stopped, but the war was not without cost. Ships were lost and soldiers died, and Chun carried the weight of every name on casualty lists that grew longer each day. He stood on the bridge of Earth's fury and watched another battle unfold on the tactical display and wondered if they had done the right. Thing Commander Park approached him with a report in her hands and concern in her eyes. Admiral, we have received a communication from the Virith High Command. They are offering a ceasefire. Chun took the report and read the terms with growing anger. The Virith would return all human prisoners immediately and guarantee safe passage for the fleet back to Concord space. In exchange, humanity would withdraw and promise never to enter Virith territory again. They want us to leave. Chun said quietly, "They will give us our people if we just go home and pretend this never happened." "It is what we came for, sir," Park said carefully. "Our mission was to rescue the colonists, and we have done that. We could end this war today and bring our soldiers home." Chun walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars that had become so familiar over the weeks of hard fighting. Somewhere beyond those stars were the worlds of the Virith Dominion, where millions of slaves still suffered in chains. "And what about the others?" he asked. "What about the Mallory children in the slave pens and the species we have never even heard who have been property for generations? Do we just leave them behind?" Park did not answer because there was no good answer. The fleet had come for humanity's own, and they had succeeded. Everything else was someone else's problem, but that was not who humans were. That was not what Earth had taught them. Chun turned away from the viewport, and his eyes were hard with decision. "Send a response to the Virith High Command. Tell them we reject their offer. Tell them we did not come this far to free only our own. Tell them this war ends when their empire falls, and every slave in their territory walks free." The message was sent, and the fragile hope of peace shattered. The Virith Empress responded within hours with a broadcast that reached every corner of the galaxy. She was ancient and terrible, her scales dark as void and her eyes burning with hate. She sat on a throne made from the bones of conquered species and spoke with a voice that had ordered the deaths of billions. "Humans," she hissed, "you dare to challenge the Dominion. You dare to threaten an empire that ruled the stars before your ancestors crawled from the mud. You have won battles, but you will not win this war." Her claws tapped against her throne, and her smile showed teeth designed for tearing flesh. "We hold millions of slaves across our territory. If you do not withdraw immediately, I will order them all destroyed. Billions will die, and their blood will be on your hands. You have one day to make your choice." The broadcast ended, and silence fell across the galaxy as every species waited to see how the Deathworlders would respond to this threat. Chun gathered his officers, and they looked at him with eyes that held the same question. "What do we do now?" "She means it, sir," Commander Park said. "Virith doctrine values pride above all else. She would rather kill every slave than admit defeat." Chun nodded slowly and felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on his shoulders. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. They could retreat and save some lives, or they could press forward and risk everything. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Broadcast to every frequency in Virith space and beyond." When the communication officer nodded, Chun spoke directly to the Empress and to every being listening across the stars. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Armada. We have received your threat, and we have made our decision. We will not withdraw. We will not stop and we will not negotiate with slavers." His voice hardened into something ancient and implacable. "You think threatening innocence will make us afraid, but you do not understand what you have done. You have not frightened us. You have made this war personal for every species in the galaxy. Every world that has lost children to your slave pens now knows what you truly are." He leaned forward, and his eyes burned with cold fire. "So here's my message to you, Empress. Start running, because now you have given every species in the galaxy a reason to join us. And we are coming for you." The transmission ended, and within hours, the first volunteer ships arrived from species who had suffered under virus raids for generations. They were not warships, and they were not soldiers, but they came anyway because the humans had done something no one else ever dared. They had fought back, and they had proven that monsters could be beaten. The coalition grew as more ships arrived from more worlds, and Admiral Chun looked at the ragged fleet assembling around his armada. They were afraid and untrained, but they were there, and that was enough. For the first time in galactic history, the prey had decided to become predators, and the Virith Empire began to tremble. Dominax Prime hung in space like a jewel of darkness, the throne world of an empire that had enslaved galaxies and crushed civilizations beneath its heel for 10,000 years. Its orbital defenses were legendary, and its surface bristled with weapons that could crack moons and burn worlds. Virith Empress watched from her palace as the coalition fleet dropped out of jump space at the edge of her system, and felt something she had never experienced in her long, cruel life. She felt doubt. 3,000 human warships formed the heart of the Armada, but they were not alone anymore. Ships from 40 different species flew alongside them, vessels crewed by beings who had lost families to Virith slavers, and who had come to see the Empire burn. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, and it had come for one purpose. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of Earth's fury and looked at the enemy homeworld filling his viewport. Somewhere down there, the Empress sat on her throne of bones and waited for the end she had brought upon herself. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Commander Park said. "The coalition commanders are awaiting your orders." Shen nodded and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Chun to all vessels. Today we end 10,000 years of slavery and suffering. Today we free every prisoner on that world and bring justice to those who thought themselves above consequence." He paused and looked at the human and alien faces watching him on screens across the fleet. "We did not come here as conquerors. We came as liberators. Remember that when the fighting starts, we are not here to destroy, we are here to save. The slaves on that world are counting on us to be better than the monsters who held them. Do not let them down." The fleet surged forward, and the final battle for Dominax Prime began. Orbital defense stations opened fire with weapons designed to shatter battleships, but the coalition had learned from weeks of hard fighting. Human warships drew fire and absorbed punishment, while faster vessels from allied species slipped through gaps in the defense grid and struck at vulnerable targets. Mallory Cruiser rammed a defense station at full speed, her captain broadcasting final words to his fleet: "For my children who were taken. For all our children who will never be taken again." The station exploded, and the sacrifice opened a path to the planet below Virith. Warships poured from hidden bases, and the battle became a chaos of fire and death that spread across the entire system. Ships died on both sides, but the coalition pressed forward with a determination that no amount of casualties could break. Admiral Chun watched his tactical display and made decisions that sent men and women to their deaths, each order weighing on his soul like chains of iron. This was the cost of war, and he had accepted it the moment he gave the order to activate Protocol Prometheus. But today, the cost would be paid in full. Launch the ground assault, he ordered. Target the slave compounds first. I want liberation teams on the ground before the Virith can carry out their threats. Dropships fell from the bellies of carriers and burned through the atmosphere of Dominax Prime like meteors made of steel and fury. Human marines in power armor led the way with soldiers, from a dozen species following close. Behind they hit the ground fighting and did not stop the Virith. Defenders were fierce, and they were many. But they were facing an enemy that had traveled across the galaxy and sacrificed thousands of lives to reach this moment. The coalition forces fought with a fire that could not be quenched, and slowly the defenses began to crumble. Commander Jackson, who had discovered the alien prisoners weeks ago now, led a team through the corridors of the largest slave compound on planet. Her armor was scarred and dented from a dozen battles, and her ammunition was running low, but she kept pushing forward. Contact ahead, one of her soldiers reported. Looks like guards. At least 30, Jackson smiled behind her helmet and raised her rifle. Good. I was getting bored. They hit the guards like a thunderbolt and carved through them in seconds. The Virith had never faced enemies who attacked with such speed and ferocity, and they broke before the human assault. Beyond the guards lay the slave pens, row after row of cages holding beings from across the galaxy. They were thin and afraid, and many bore the scars of years of cruelty. When they saw the coalition soldiers approaching, they pressed against the bars with hope dawning in their eyes. Jackson opened the first cage and helped a young Mallory female to her feet. The girl looked at her with wonder and spoke in a voice rusty from years of silence. Are you the Deathworlders? Are you the humans who came to fight the monsters? Yes, Jackson said. And we are taking you home. Across the planet, similar scenes played out as liberation teams freed millions of slaves who had never dared to dream that rescue would come. They cried and laughed and hugged their liberators and asked questions that had no easy answers. The battle for the orbital space raged on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Virith fleet was breaking as ships fled into deep space or surrendered to coalition forces. The mighty empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years was falling apart in a single day. Admiral Chun received word that ground teams had breached the Imperial Palace and were closing on the throne room. He gave orders for the Empress to be taken alive and waited with the rest of the galaxy for news. Final assault on the throne room was led by Colonel Sarah Chun, the same woman who had sent the distress call from New Elysium and started the war that would reshape galactic history. She had asked for the honor, and no one had dared refuse her. She kicked down the doors and found the Empress waiting on her throne of bones, ancient and defiant and utterly alone. The guards were dead or fled, and the servants had abandoned their posts. The ruler of an empire sat in an empty room and watched her conquerors approach. So the Deathworlders have won. The Empress said, "You have destroyed everything I built. Are you proud of yourselves?" Sarah removed her helmet and looked at the creature who had caused so much suffering. "We did not destroy your empire. You did. You built something on a foundation of cruelty and expected it to last forever. Today you learned that nothing built on suffering survives." The Empress laughed, and it was a sound without humor. "You think you are different. You think your precious coalition will last. Power always corrupts, little human. Give it time and your kind will be just like us." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but not today. Today we chose to be something better. Today we proved that strength can be used to protect instead of destroy." She raised her weapon, and the Empress flinched, expecting death. But Sarah only fired a stunned charge that dropped the ancient slaver into unconsciousness. She wanted to be a martyr. Sarah said to her team, "Martyrs inspire. Prisoners in chains break empires. Take her alive." The war ended with the capture of the Empress and the liberation of every slave on Dominax Prime. In the weeks that followed, coalition forces swept through the remaining Virith territories and freed billions more, while the Empire collapsed into chaos. Greatest slaver civilization in galactic history was dismantled in months by an alliance led by the species that everyone had dismissed as dangerous primitives from a Death World 1. Year later, Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood before the Galactic Concord and addressed delegates from 300 species, who looked at her with respect and wonder and just a little fear. "You called us Deathworlders," she said. "You meant it as a warning, and you are right to be cautious. We are dangerous. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day, and we survived by learning to fight." She looked around the chamber at faces she had come to know over years of diplomacy and smiled. "But you misunderstood what that danger meant. We did not build our hidden fleet to conquer. We built it because we know what it means to suffer and to lose and to almost be extinguished. We built it so that when someone screamed for help into the void, there would be someone strong enough to answer." The chamber was silent as she spoke the words that would be remembered for centuries. "We are the children of a death world, and we are proud of what we are. Not because we are violent, but because we survived. And we learned something in all those years of struggle. We learned that the only thing worth fighting for is each other." She raised her hand, and on the screen, behind her, images appeared of freed slaves returning to their homeworlds and of coalition ships, protecting trade routes, and of humans working alongside aliens to build a galaxy where no one would ever be property again. "This is who we are," Kira said. "Not conquerors, but protectors. Not tyrants, but liberators. We ask only that you judge us by our actions and not by your fears." The applause started slowly, but it grew until it filled the chamber and spilled out into the corridors beyond. Not everyone was clapping, but enough were, and that was a beginning across the galaxy, in taverns and homes and ships traveling between stars. Beings of every species told stories about the Deathworlders who had awoken when an enemy made the mistake of touching their people. They told stories about humans who fought like demons and showed mercy like angels and refused to stop until every slave was free. When darkness gathered and tyrants rose, and the helpless cried out for salvation, a new prayer spread across the stars. It was not a prayer of fear, but of hope. It was a prayer that had once been a warning: send for the Deathworlders. Base the Deathworlders would always answer.